Yo, it's the Latino Newsletter podcast. It's a show about us all the time, and I am your host, Julio Ricardo Varela. A special thanks to the generous support from the Latino Community Foundation for season 1 of this podcast. Learn more about the Latino Community Foundation at latinocf.org. We are at episode 19. 19. Oh, the 80s. Gotta love it. That's from 1985, Paul Hardcastle. And so listen, we're actually shifting the conversation to Puerto Rico. One of the issues that I've been following since Election Day has been the non-binding plebiscite out of Puerto Rico, plebiscite number 7, where statehood took about, high 50s in votes. And again, there's a lot of debate and there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of like, what does this all mean? And, this vote doesn't count, blah, 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 blah. And if you know my work, you all know that I am a big critic of the political status machine industry that has sort of dominated Puerto Rican politics for decades. And I wanted to discuss this plebiscite and its implications with a fabulous guest and someone I absolutely respect. She's joining us from Columbia University, Columbia Law School in New York. You might hear a couple of sirens during our conversation, but that's what happens when you record in New York City. But let me read part of our guest's bio. Christina D. Ponsa-Kraus joined the faculty of Columbia Law School in 2007. A Puerto Rican raised on the island, she writes about the constitutional history of American territorial expansion and the extraterritorial application of the U.S. Constitution, examining their implications for American federalism, citizenship, and nationhood. I mean, she's done work in legal issues surrounding the political status of Puerto Rico and other U.S. territories like the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and American Samoa, and has written about these issues in the mainstream media as well as in scholarly publications. She is co-author of Foreign in a Domestic Sense, Puerto Rico, American Expansion, and the Constitution, which is a groundbreaking study of the United States' unfinished colonial experiment. Profesora Christina de Ponsa-Kraus, welcome to the Latino Newsletter podcast. I'm so excited to have you on.
I'm excited to be here finally.
Listen, obviously, I'm sure there's a lot of people in this part of the world that have no idea what happened with this non-binding plebiscite, the 7th one. Can you just give, what's the latest information that we know about the plebiscite results out of Puerto Rico? Just to give a rundown of that first.
Sure. So the results were that statehood won by 57%,
Right.
Almost 57%. Independence did much better than ever. For a long time, independence has been polling in the single digits, but in this plebiscite, it rose to over 30, and free association is also doing better than ever. But I don't even know if people know what these options are.
That's what I wanted to ask you.
So I'm dutifully answering your question, but I'm probably raising many more as I speak.
Well, it's such a natural follow-up because here we are. It's round 7 of the plebiscite. Now, the first one, I was born in 1969.
Me too.
So there we go. So we are children of 6 plebiscites, right? The first one happened before we were born. So this has been going on literally in our lifetime, Profesora. So
Yeah.
You talk about the status issues, but really, how do you begin to break this all down from the work that you've done and all the studies that you've produced and analyses and testimonies? Where are we at? Where are we at? And how do we break all these territorial status options down first?
Yeah, well, I get completely where your question is coming from, because having experienced a lifetime of this, and as a people having experienced centuries of
Yeah.
this, being a colony, asking for decolonization, expressing ourselves, first under Spain, then under the United
Yeah.
States, it feels like an eternity, and it's easy for kind of emotion to overcome. But But in the end, one can't solve the problem without working one's way through the thicket of legal
Yeah.
problems and legal political problems. And so I guess I would begin to answer your question, and then I'll stop and let you say more, with the word non-binding. So I think a lot of people wonder why Puerto Rico keeps having non-binding votes on
Right.
status. And the bottom line there, in my view, is that every time we vote on status, we're sending a message. I think people understand, Puerto Ricans understand, most Puerto Ricans voting in a plebiscite understand Puerto Rico can't force Congress to do anything. Puerto Rico can't force the United States to do anything. A colony can't force its colonizer to decolonize it. You have to persuade. And what we've done over and over is hold plebiscites that we organize, that the local government organizes, the local political parties define the options, or the local government defines the
Yeah.
options. It varies from plebiscite to plebiscite. But the way I think of it each time, it's like we are modeling for Congress what Congress ought to do. Congress ought to be working through this problem, defining the options and offering them to Puerto Rico. That is my lodestar, is that Congress needs to make an offer, not just sit there and watch us debate and then watch us vote and then do nothing. But because it hasn't taken the action it needs to take, we keep voting over and over and over. And that, in a nutshell, is why we've ended up now at our 7th vote, because they still haven't acted and we're still trying to convince them to act.
So is this the right way to approach it then after 7 times? I mean, I'm kind of getting to the point where it's like, here we go again. And it's just like a symbol, because the real work is what you're saying is who literally is in charge of Puerto Rico, right? And so is it congressional action? Is that the only way that anything will change?
Well, the key is that this is not the only way to approach it. So I'm 100% with you there.
Okay.
We can't solve the problem by holding non-binding plebiscites, and non-binding plebiscites alone, I don't think ultimately will persuade Congress. But I think if Congress doesn't act and we didn't speak out somehow in a concerted way that is representative, well, then, it would be much easier for Congress to ignore us. Unfortunately, it's easy enough for Congress to drag its feet, but what are we going to do? Do nothing? So there are other things that can be done, and there are other things that people are doing. So they, as I'm sure you know, but maybe some listeners don't know, there have been really constant efforts from Puerto Rico, both from government officials and activists and political parties and the public, to try to move the United States and move Congress in particular to take action to resolve Puerto Rico's status debate by doing what it takes to decolonize Puerto Rico, since Puerto Rico was annexed. And as I mentioned, and Puerto Rico was annexed in 1898. So it's a long time. Right. And as I had mentioned earlier, Puerto Rico was a colony of Spain before it became a colony of the United States. And throughout the 19th century, the same thing happened. I mean, it was the 19th century. It didn't look exactly the same, but native-born Puerto Ricans clamored for an end to their subordinate status and either inclusion in Spain or some form of autonomy. That was really what they coalesced around. And some also called for independence. So, it's deja vu all over again. It's history repeating itself. And certainly non-binding plebiscites are not the only thing. So we need to keep speaking up. We need to keep pressuring Congress with, whatever measures we have: writing, speaking, conferences, activism, mobilization. There is one alternative approach that I think has substantial support in Puerto Rico, though maybe not majority. I'm not sure.
Okay, I'm interested.
And that is that we hold a constitutional convention of our own and define the options there, and then have a vote on those. And I do not believe that is the right path forward. And it can be challenging to make this argument because you say, constitutional convention, and that sounds great to people. And isn't that an act of sovereignty and dignity and, self-determination and so on? And the reason I don't think a constitutional convention is an alternative that makes sense, is that that's us again, back to the drawing board again. We define the options. We propose them to, we vote on them. We propose them to Congress, and maybe Congress acts and maybe it doesn't. And while a plebiscite can draw on existing party definitions, existing definitions in congressional bills, a constitutional convention is no small thing. It is a grueling effort. And to put us to that effort, to fight amongst ourselves about these definitions that have divided us for so long, and to do something that should come with a constitutional convention should be something that then you can implement. It's demeaning and it's ineffective in my view. And it is asking too much to have us undergo a process like that with no guarantee that Congress will do anything. So I do think that a much more sort of effective way and less demanding of us, we've already given much more than we should to get decolonization and haven't gotten it. So to my mind, other methods are more appropriate.
So talk to me about the other methods, because this is what you do, right? You explore these other methods. So what are the other methods that would push this?
Yeah, so I don't want to disappoint you. I mean, I think the other methods are mainly political mobilization and activism.
Okay.
And I come into this as a constitutional law expert who can and wants to answer the questions that arise that can form obstacles to a resolution if people don't understand the answers.
Got it.
So where I come in is in my scholarly writings and in my editorials and in my congressional testimony. I have tried to address what I think are either unanswered questions about which there's confusion, or misleading statements, whether they're intentionally misleading or just uninformed, that in my view have affected how people think of what their options are. But I think that that's what I do is, just my small contribution, and it can be meaningful in the right context. But I think much more important is mobilization in Puerto Rico. So political leaders and civic leaders need to educate people about what their options are, need to encourage people to vote. I think it's a tragedy every time Puerto Ricans are discouraged from voting. And I know people have made arguments to support that kind of stance, but I don't get it and don't agree with it.
Yeah.
I think people ought to vote and express themselves.
Yeah.
I think that inevitably there's lobbying to be done, and there's lobbying being done. And I don't think that lobbying, which of course depends on money to be influential, is the fair way to accomplish what you have to accomplish, but it is an inevitable way to accomplish what you have to accomplish in Congress. I think Puerto Rican political leaders need to relentlessly press their congressional representatives, who obviously don't represent them as constituents, but who lord it over us. But I am not a politician. And so I wish I knew better the most effective ways to mobilize people. All I can do from my end is contribute as much as I can of the information that I think is helpful. And I do think that a lot of that information just needs to be, part of an educational campaign. So people aren't afraid to vote for this, or they're voting for that because this other thing is going to happen if they vote for the other thing. Or, you've got to give people their options. Decolonization is possible. And what you have to do is tell people, here's your options.
Yeah.
And now you can vote on them. And that's what Congress should do, because it's Congress who has the power to implement them.
But I still want to know, what's your argument? What should people know? If you're saying Puerto Rican political leaders have to do a better job informing the public, which I agree with you, I also come from the position, I've been very clear about this since forever, that I think the last 50 plus years of status politics has done nothing to this island. It hasn't advanced it at all. You've created this industry of status machines, right? You have these parties that that's all they live for. So that's my take, right? So I'm interested in what you're saying in Congress, what you're writing about, because I actually believe that we have to look at this completely differently. So take it away.
Okay. Well, I would love to hear more of your view, but here I am, and I'll give you mine. I agree with you that for the last really 70 years, we were just locked in a battle that didn't move us forward much, although there was some forward progress recently. So for the better part of 70 years, we mainly battled over what Commonwealth was. So for those 70 years, there were three options primarily on the table, represented, as you said, by three political parties. And I will say, by the way, I get the frustration that the political parties are defined by their status positions.
Yes.
But I believe that people who have been denied a non-colonial, legitimate form of government are necessarily going to debate how to get a legitimate non-colonial form of government always until they have one. And then you can focus on ordinary politics and leave status aside.
Okay.
That's my view. So it makes perfect sense that the parties are organized that way. So for the better part of 70 years, there were three options: statehood, Commonwealth, which is the current status, and independence. And while you can argue about the details of various options, some very important details, and I'll say more about that, the main topic of debate was Commonwealth. Supporters of Commonwealth argued that Commonwealth status was a non-colonial status. They claimed that under Commonwealth, we had a guaranteed autonomy. That is, we have local self-government. It looks like a state government. We have our elected governor. We have an elected bicameral legislature. We have our own Puerto Rican courts that are like state courts. And we also have the federal court system there and federal agencies. We look like a state without voting rights and with some loopholes on taxes and a few other things. And Commonwealth supporters said this is all guaranteed and this is good enough because we're unique. And so we don't want to be a state, but we don't want to be independent either. And so this is our own special arrangement that sort of vindicates Puerto Rican uniqueness. And Commonwealth opponents, myself among them, said this is not guaranteed autonomy. Frankly, if it were guaranteed, it would be even worse because we're still subject to U.S. sovereignty. We're still subject to federal laws, and we can't vote in the federal government. We don't have voting representation there. But in any event, not even guaranteed, we're still subject to Congress's power to govern territories under the Territory Clause and that of the Constitution. It's a clause in the Constitution. And that gives Congress the power to withdraw our autonomy or give us more or, do what it wants. And that, combined with the total lack of representation, is, of course, deeply colonial. And so over and over in the plebiscites that you've mentioned, really in the first four, I guess it was, or maybe it was the first three, the Commonwealth Party didn't even offer plain old Commonwealth as an option because they understood that these objections existed. And so they would always offer enhanced Commonwealth. So when Puerto Ricans voted in 67 and 93, and was it 98? Now I'm losing track. None of the above one.
98, Right,
98, the above one. But in 67 and 93, when they voted for Commonwealth, they voted for enhanced Commonwealth.
Correct.
Not the current status.
Correct.
And so, the confusion. On the one hand, they claim the current status is not colonial. On the other hand, they won't even put it on the ballot. Meanwhile, one side says this is the solution, and the other side says, no, this is unending colonialism. And that's where we were trapped. And Congress
it's surreal.
Sits back and does nothing.
Surreal.
And so what ends up happening is that really mainly the statehood party, although the independence party criticizes Commonwealth as well, but the statehood party ends up organizing some plebiscites that don't include Commonwealth on the ballot. And Commonwealth supporters will complain that if a majority of the Puerto Rican people want to vote for Commonwealth, it should be on the ballot. And I could not disagree more. If a status is colonial, then it can't be on a decolonization ballot. So what happens? The statehood party ends up organizing some plebiscites without Commonwealth on the ballot. The Commonwealth party calls for a vote for none of the above on one of them and then objects to the others. And you have inconclusive results and unending debate and unending colonialism.
And here we are.
Well, and here we are, I'll throw in one more thing. I know I've been going on for a while, but let me just say one more thing, which is that with the creation of the Financial Oversight and Management Board, which has extreme powers over the government of Puerto Rico, the argument for Commonwealth being guaranteed autonomy died. Nobody should be saying that anymore, and far fewer people
100%.
do. Because Congress did take away some of
100%.
our autonomy unilaterally without our participation. And so it's obvious that this is colonial. It's obvious that Commonwealth can't decolonize us. And so now we're at, the options are statehood, free association, and independence. And I think it's a moment in which that is progress. We could make progress if we persuade Congress to offer us those options.
First of all, thank you for breaking it down. And I think it's pretty safe to say that the current Commonwealth, like, it is colonial. And I don't know many Puerto Ricans who are saying, like, yeah, Commonwealth is not colonial. I think I think that's been a major shift, right, in the last 20 years.
Yes.
It's okay. It's
Agreed.
okay to say that we're a colony, because growing up, and you and I grew up in the same time, that's not what we were told, right? That you're exactly right about what happened in the 90s, right? We're autonomous. I remember the movements where it's like, we're going to move to kilometers, and I'm like, what's going on?
Me too. Yeah, come on.
You know,
Come on.
So
Come on.
that established fact is that Puerto Rico is a colony, and you're saying these three options need to get pushed. So besides lobbying Congress, besides making Puerto Rico an issue, and I'll always talk about Puerto Rico until people tell me I can't, and I'll still talk about Puerto Rico. Are we still going to be on the same path, having the same discussion 5 to 10 years from now, or do you, looking from your analysis, have we moved into a different part of the debate?
I believe we have moved into a new and better phase of the debate, because people recognize that the current status is colonial.
Yeah.
And because there has been some activity in Congress, they still haven't passed a bill, but some activity in Congress with the Puerto Rico Status Act, which, as you know, passed in the House in 2022 and then was reintroduced in the Senate. And that bill defines non-colonial options. Those are statehood, free association, as it is defined under international law, not Commonwealth, but an in-between status that would give Puerto Rico sovereignty, and would involve a treaty with the United States with some power-sharing features that either side could leave at any time, and then independence. Those are the three options: statehood, free association, independence. Those are non-colonial options. And the Puerto Rico Status Act defines them, defines the transition, and offers them. Like any bill, there's plenty to discuss. There's various aspects that people disagree with, but that basic model where Congress offers the options, it defines them, offers them, and commits to implementing a transition to the option that wins is the way to go. And I don't think it's a happy thing that Congress has control, but it is a reality that we need to live with. And so when you ask, do you think we're going to be having the same debate in 5 or 10 years? Here's what I say. When people talk about this, people begin to feel, hopeless. And is this ever going to end? And I have felt it myself, but if you look back in the 1950s, if you were a civil rights activist in the 1950s, would you have thought that Congress is ever going to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 or the Voting Rights Act of 1965? Probably not. You would have thought this is going to take another Lord knows how many generations. If you were an abolitionist in the 1850s, would you have thought that slavery will end? You would have thought it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. If at once equal protection was put in the Constitution, it didn't include women.
Yeah.
If we had thought, if you had asked a woman in the 1870s, do you think they'll ever give us voting rights after they amended the Constitution, put the equal protection clause in it, and didn't include women? They would have said, I don't think it's ever going to happen. But abolitionists wouldn't give up, and activists for the women's right to vote would not give up, and civil rights activists would not give up. One can't give up. One can't give up fighting in what one believes in. And so, Congress, it's very hard to move Congress, but we cannot decolonize without congressional action. That is simply the brutal, unavoidable reality. And so we need to keep pushing Congress. And that's also not an easy thing to do. And it really relies heavily on political leaders, but civic leaders can speak up, activists can speak up, scholars can speak up, the public can speak up, just at every opportunity we have. And so I just hope that in Puerto Rico, people will coalesce around non-colonial options and just stop pushing this continued Commonwealth that has kept us trapped in this colonial condition for so long. And I believe it'll happen, but we need to make it happen.
Christina Ponsa-Kraus, I'm so glad you said yes to our interview request. Thank you for being on the Latino Newsletter podcast with me.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Okay, there you go. These are the type of conversations we need to be having about status of Puerto Rico. And I encourage all of you who are listening to this conversation, if you're interested in this debate, keep following the work of voices like Christina's, who are trying to at least push the envelope and say that what we've done in the past ain't working. It ain't working. So if you want to resolve this status issue, look at it through a different lens. And I really appreciate Christina for being on. All right. The Latino Newsletter is produced and edited by me, Julio Ricardo Varela, and fellow Boricua, Joaquin Cotler. Mixing and sound design by Joaquin Cotler. Music by Cast of Characters via Soundstripe. You can now donate to us at thelatinonewsletter.org and click on the donate tab, or here on Spotify in the show notes. We're at 35% of our year-end target. Let's get to 100%, and we can keep this podcast going. How's that, huh? If you love this podcast, give to us by the end of this year, and we'll keep it going. All right? And if you like what you heard, share this podcast, rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Like I said, we're on Spotify. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Audible, iHeartRadio, YouTube. You can tweet at us at Lat Newsletter. We're on the Blue Sky at Lat Newsletter, Blue Sky app, blah, blah, blah. Still don't know how to handle that profile URL, but one day I'll figure it out. And on all other social media platforms, we are at the Latino Newsletter. And you can always send me an email, Julio at thelatinonewsletter.org. We have another show for season 1. We got that one booked, and that's going to be a great conversation. So we'll be back next week with episode 20. We're going to hit 20 episodes. Thank you for all your support. Peace out, y'all.